It is that high school time is a really interesting time in your musical development, I think. What you were talking about with them not really knowing how to listen to music. Because I remember that time and obviously that was the time that I was getting into heavy music, and sort of finding elements of it that I liked and not really having any sort of taste or anything at the time, taking a lot of it. But then it's been really interesting revisiting the stuff I listened to as a kid and finding which stuff that I still like and stuff that I don't like and thinking about why.
I just want to say that I haven't even introduced the episode yet, but I'm going to start. I'm going to leave it with that.
Okay.
So, welcome to Amuse episode 5 of season 2. That is probably the best intro I've had so far. So, thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan is the bass player for a group known as Demons of Noon, which I got to review, thankfully, from music.net.nz. And like a lot of the artists I'm talking to and listening to, they're people that I've never really heard before. And I'm just always blown away by the sheer volume of talent and awesome music that exists out there. So welcome to our show, Jonathan. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me along.
Well, good. Let's carry on that discussion. Tell me why. Tell me like what you learned from your experiences from the high school years of listening to music and what you've learned as you've grown older.
So, well, I guess there was a lot that I learned in high school because firstly, we're of a similar vintage, which we were discussing before this episode. So grew up during nu metal, grew up with bands like Korn, bands like the Deftones, bands like Limp Bizkit, and being a young teenage dude, that sort of like angry American suburban culture made it to us in the early 2000s. And then bands like Rage Against the Machine as well, that was all going on. And I loved all of that stuff at the time. But then I don't think I could listen to Limp Bizkit anymore, definitely.
Really?
Yeah. But things like the Deftones are still one of my favorite bands. And then that gave me my sort of foundations in heavy music, which we're digging into at the moment with Demons of Noon. So it was a really interesting time to musically come of age, I think, while nu metal was going on.
Yeah, so just to add to that, when I was 12, I actually just bought Korn's debut album on vinyl. I've kind of been going through this vinyl renaissance, and I'm not one of those people that just buy vinyl because vinyl's cool. Like my parents own a lot of vinyl, and listening to it, I love it when someone takes like the recording and masters it specifically for vinyl versus just taking the digital recording or whatever CD recording and then putting it on vinyl. But anyway, listening to it for the first time, it took me back to when I literally was 12 years old. And my friend at the time at intermediate school, his elder brother was like, yeah, have you heard this band Korn? This is 1996. And I was like, I've never heard that name before. And as we were leaving to go to Temple Bowling on Juice TV, I'm pretty sure it was Jeremy Wells. Maybe it was someone else. But anyway, they said, oh, and upcoming, we've got, Korn and blah, blah, blah. So I was like, oh, we're leaving. So I stuck in the VHS and I hit record and we went Timber Bowling. And the next morning I rewound the tape and I found it as I was getting ready for school and Shoots and Ladders came on. That was the song that they had shown. And I stood there and my jaw dropped. I'd never heard anything like that before. And that was my first introduction. I'm not going to say to metal, but to like that nu metal sound that hadn't come about before. But your band doesn't really sound like nu metal to me whatsoever. It's more of a doom thing. So what sort of influences and how did the Deftones, as you mentioned, kind of influence and inspire you to get to that level?
So there's quite a long story behind this. Like I've had quite a long musical journey to get to this point. But I first wanted to say that, did you know that Steve Vai is a really big Korn fan?
Yes, because sorry to interrupt. I
He,
read that he pulled over to the side of the road when he heard Korn because he was like, "Whoa, I'd never heard anyone." Because they dropped their guitars down a whole step, so they're an A versus standard. Is that right? Is that
yeah, that's correct. Which is actually the Demons of Noon tuning.
No way.
We go down to drop A. Yeah. But yeah, your story reminded me of Steve Vai's story of pulling over and freaking out. So yeah, I mean, I'll try and tell this story as short as possible, but in high school, was interested in new metal and stuff, loved things like Nirvana and things like that, because we came through sort of just after grunge, so was in bands doing Nirvana type stuff at the time, and actually had a really cool teacher who slipped me a copy of a Caius album, which was great.
Honestly, so what school did you go to?
McLean's College.
Yo, that's awesome that he slipped you Kai's. Kai's was,
Yeah, which was like, she could obviously tell that I was into music and stuff like that, but also had this sort of scattergun approach to what I was into, like I was talking about, I think you have as a teenager. And it was nice to just have that little guiding push from someone a little bit further in the journey. But I ended up dropping out of first year university to go full time with a stoner rock band, who were called International Flannel. and then we did that for a little while, and I actually ended up doing a music degree, did a jazz performance degree.
Whereabouts was that?
At the University of Auckland.
Wicked. When were you there?
2006-ish, maybe, to 2008-ish, something like that. And was lucky to have a real cool year, a real cool group of people going through it at the same time.
We'll come back to that and talk. Yeah. I'll talk a little bit to that a little bit later on, but carry on.
Nice. And so went through all of that, and then spent a few years working full time as a musician, which was a super fun period. And then, sort of wanted to do things like buy an apartment and have a kid and that sort of stuff. So ended up working a day job at the university, and at some point a few years into that, I'd been busy for so many years just sort of playing session bass on everyone else's stuff all the time. My phone went a little bit quiet. And instead of getting down about that, I was like, this is an opportunity to put together a band. Heavy music is the thing that I love the most and love playing the most, and was the thing that I've been doing the least for the last 5 years or something. So I took that as an opportunity. And a friend of mine runs a choir, and every year they put on a concert where they sing like a rock album. Like they've done Hail to the Thief, and they've done some Smashing Pumpkins, and he gets me in, like, it has a live band with it, and I come in and play bass on that. And awesome. One year we did Songs for the Deaf by Queens of the Stone Age. And that album is in C standard tuning. I tuned my bass down to C and was just blown away by the sound. Got a few comments on this and was like, this is a great concept. I want to start a heavy band, a down-tuned band. A friend of mine who's a great drummer was living in London, and I knew he was coming back, so I called him up and said, I'm starting this band. You gotta join it with me. And then pulled in a few other friends, and just ended up getting together on Sunday afternoons to just play extremely loud. We started off in C tuning. Abraham, our guitarist, was like, dude, it's not low enough. So we moved down to A. I play a 4-string bass in it as well, so I had to do a few mods to get that 4-string bass down that low, but it's sounding pretty cool now. And just in Whammy Bar under St. Kevin's Arcade, we would go there on Sunday afternoons and just play gloriously loud and gloriously slow. And it was really, it was a cool thing for all of us.
I guess like Caius is one of the bands during that 1996 stage. Was his name Carl? I can't remember. I know, was it maybe Chris? That was Chris. That's right. Yeah, Chris. So he's the guy who introduced me to Korn. He also talked about Caius.
Yeah.
And so now when I think about like hearing Caius and it's that slow, as you mentioned, like stoner rock's tuned down. When I listen to your group Demons of Noon, you can kind of hear. I wrote in the review that it sounded like the Doom, but more kind of like that stoner, slow, sludgy rock, where it just becomes this ginormous wall of sound. But the interesting thing you mentioned is that you went to university and did jazz. I was at Auckland University from 2009 to 2011 studying pop music. So we would have been in the same building, KMC building.
Amazing.
But you would have, but you would have left before I'd even probably got there. So honestly, so what kind of drew you so much to that sound of like doom and sludge and stoner versus doing jazz and stuff like that? What is the appeal? Because there's probably a lot of people out there that I know if they listen to your music, they'd be like, I don't like this, and that's quite common because I teach hip hop at my school, and there's a lot of kids that like rock, and they're like, I don't understand this. So talk to us about like how you got into it. What draws you to that style?
So this is another sort of story of coming around full circle, where another thing that I was really into when I was younger was complexity in music. Like I was obsessed with Mr. Bungle. I was obsessed
Yo,
with Tool.
yo,
Obsessed with Radiohead. This
yeah,
like really detaily sort of stuff. And for a long time, I wrote off a lot of music that didn't have that sort of complexity that I was after. And then went to jazz school and got deeper into complexity. We, a friend of mine, we had a band called Dr. Colossus, which was like an Eastern European cinematic surf weirdo sort of band where
there's a whole bunch of genres that like
yeah,
don't I can't imagine fitting together. That sounds awesome.
I'll send you some stuff later on when
Yo,
we're finished. But Leon, the guy that writes all this stuff, is just all in bizarre time signatures. It's in 7, 8, 9, 11, whatever. And we still play as we're called Fortress Europe these days. We still play as that, but just got into super sophisticated, complicated stuff. Um, Ended up playing on a lot of sophisticated sort of stuff, and then actually, just as part of my musical journey, finally learnt to appreciate simplicity in songwriting and in songs.
mm.
And then especially coming back into heavy music and just being inspired by bands like Sun, where it's just about tone and it's about that wall of sound that you're talking about, and it's just like this. It's a really visceral, physical experience to play that stuff, um, and it sounds really good if you have just like great tube amps, great guitars, and just room to let the riffs breathe. Um, they're really cool, and it was really funny because um, two of the other dudes in the band have jazz degrees as well.
That's
Um,
awesome.
Abe, our guitarist, and Joe, our drummer, both we all went through jazz stuff. We have since you listen, because you've never come to one of our shows, right?
No, so you sent me an email. This is how we got. By the way, this is how we got this interview going. Was that like I've been meaning to come and see you guys for a little while because I said at the very end of your review, I was like, I want to see these guys. No, but I look forward to it. And by the way, I just want to say for the record, and I'm speaking on behalf of the rest of the population, you do not look like the sort of person that I would expect in a doom metal band. I've seen Immortal videos, so I was like expecting the long hair and the
Yeah.
face paint and stuff like that. So I'm reasonably disappointed on behalf of everybody else. You've broken the
Damn,
stereotype.
damn. I'm
I
sorry.
know.
There's another good story with that as well, where we're like not even finishing stories. We'll come back to talking about
We'll
simplicity.
go back to that one.
I'll
Yeah.
drop this yarn. Because we were very lucky in that our first show ever was opening for Beast Wars at San Fran Bathhouse down in Wellington. So just the perfect first show where we just got to play to a sold out San Fran Bathhouse, just directly to the heart of New Zealand's heavy metal scene in
Yo.
Wellington. Um, but NATO, the Beast Wars drummer, who was a total legend, he sort of met us and got to know us and stuff, and was like, I can see why you guys don't have any promo shots out there, because no one would take you seriously.
Well, that's like when I saw your album cover, I was like, yeah, I mean that ticks the box for or EP cover was like, yeah, that ticks the box for like the sort of band name and style. And then I've never seen the photo of you guys at all. So you're like the mysterious, band that no one really knows, which I actually admire.
Yeah,
I like bands that keep their personalities hidden, you know.
it's
Um,
a tough thing to pull off these days.
Totally, totally. That's a whole other conversation. You should, yeah, read, yeah. Anyway, so how much jazz is an interesting style. I actually it took me for a long time to get into jazz. One of my favorite albums, and this is probably just like a standard for most of you guys. Are like, yeah, well, most people start with that, but Kind of Blue is the album that's really for me is allowed me to breathe more into jazz and to understand it more. I teach Take Five by Dave Brubeck at school. It's part of one of the standards I do. That's kind of I find a simplistic song to get into. It's easy to, it's accessible. Whereas like Miles Davis's, kind of Blue to me took me a long time to understand it. What are some of the jazz artists that you think have you have really influenced you as a musician and has shaped your band in some ways, because there's a lot going on in doom metal and stoner rock that people probably don't know if they don't know what to listen for.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, Kind of Blue is a wonderful album, and sort of in many ways you could either do a 3-year jazz degree or you could just listen really deeply to Kind of Blue for 3 years and probably come away with the same result.
Okay.
That's the the thing with music education, like it's all in the music, right? But somehow sometimes you need a little bit of help to find that all out. But I think probably I read a really good book recently called Monolithic Undertow, which is a history of drone music, which sort of traces it right back from ancient times, actually through jazz and then into sort of modern bands that I really love, like Bong Ripper and Sun. Free jazz pops in the middle of that. People like Ornette Coleman and Albert Ayler, that if you're talking about jazz being inaccessible, they're pretty inaccessible. You need like quite a bit of knowledge to get into that stuff, where it's like quite free form. Without a little bit of understanding, you probably don't know what's going on.
Can I say that, like, I used to go to the I don't know what it was called then. I don't know what it's called now, but on the corner of Wellesley Street and Queen Street, there was like an upstairs venue that used to do jazz.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's called the Jazz Bar.
No, it wasn't. It was iconic. Why can't I remember it? The Irish place.
It's next to the Irish place. Yeah.
Upstairs from.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. But anyway, I went there once.
Yeah, that was the joint.
I remember watching people like applaud and be like, "Yeah, this is awesome." I was sitting there with my mum going, "What the hell is this music?"
Yeah.
Didn't have any understanding or appreciation. So I can imagine that freeform jazz being that sort of stuff, and me being like, "I'm uneducated in this stuff."
Yeah, but sort of talking about how that like drone music taps into like quite a primal thing, and also one of the things that you'll notice with Demons of Noon is that we're a little bit loose with timing. We like to sort of pull and stretch the beats, which is definitely a jazz thing, playing with that.
Totally.
But then also comes through into bands like the Melvins, where we'll have sort of like, you'll hear Phil's sort of slow down and we'll do big hangs, and yeah, that's the sort of stuff that is really good to play around with if you've had a really good background in rhythm. You can play with it that much instead of everything falling apart when you lose the tempo.
So no click track in the drummer's ear for you guys.
No click track free zone.
Yo, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And like, I guess with a band like yours, the feel is really a live situation, right? Like it's best experienced live.
Absolutely.
It's one of the tricks and the things that I find really difficult in the modern age of music, where it's so accessible. Like you can just on demand get what you want, right?
Yeah.
And if they don't like what they hear within the first 5 seconds, they can just switch songs. But if you're in a venue and you've got a band like yourself up there, then you can get it into the whole atmosphere. So what you talked about there about the free form and the slowness of like going between beat to beat, that kind of builds anticipation and knowing what's coming, feeling what's coming next, and then you're just holding it off a little bit. That would be an awesome experience, especially in somewhere like the Whammy Bar, which I know is kind of small. Is that close to the wine cellar? I think
yes.
I've only been to the wine cellar.
Yeah,
I don't think I've been to Whammy Bar.
They're both underneath St. Kevin's Arcade, sort of one on each side. There's a big complex that runs underneath there that I think it was a reasonably iconic dance club in the 90s.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But yeah, they're sort of almost single-handedly keeping independent music alive in Auckland at the moment, those two venues.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the really cool things about bands like yourself and other groups out there is, don't get me wrong, I think that at the moment mainstream is like mainstream, and that's what people want to go to. But as I mentioned before, there's so much incredible talent and incredible music that I guess regardless of the how successful you are seen on charts or social media likes or video views, etc. If someone comes to see you live, they'll be like, "Whoa!" And then you get the word of mouth, and it's like, "You have you seen this band? You got to come and see them."
Yeah.
And you're right. I think like venues like that, the staple of trying to bring back or keeping alive those experiences for people, right?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think that's another thing that really attracts me to Doom, is that it is such a live experience. It's such a cool subgenre, I guess. There's a real community around it, and it's around that live event. It's almost like a ritual sort of thing, which is something that's missing in
Yeah.
modern life. I do sort of. I had a funny moment. I was at a Napalm Death concert at the King's Arms, RIP, and was sort of like, watching the sort of like balding British dude in shorts or whatever yelling about whales going extinct over these really short, heavy things, and I'm like, this guy has figured out modern life. Like, he is the most sane. This is the most sane reaction to modernity that I've seen.
Yeah.
It's stressful being alive at the moment, and this sort of stuff really gives you a release. And you just,
But
yeah,
but there's a misconception, right? Like, so if you say, yeah, I like Doom, people will be like, well, they might react to you in a particular way because they've got these assumptions about that style of music. Like if someone says they like Pantera, or like I like Cannibal Corpse, right? So I
yeah,
like everything.
yeah.
But
Is
so
that
what do you say to that stuff? Like how do you react to people who say, oh, what's Doom? Isn't that the style of music where they kill people and they worship Satan, etc.? What do you say to that?
well, it's sort of, I mean, we're, as humans, we're complicated things. We've got light sides and we've got dark sides, and I think it's good to um, express the dark side in constructive ways like that. If you don't have outlets for that sort of stuff, actual bad things could happen.
Totally.
So film, music, all that stuff that you're sort of into, and yeah, it's a really good outlet for that side.
And you mentioned before, I think before we hit record, was that like we've both been to concerts where if people didn't know about it, they would assume that if someone fell down in a mosh pit, they'd just get stomped on. But actually, what did you say at the beginning?
Oh, the friendliest audiences I've ever been in as a music fan myself. You fall over, there's always someone there sort of checking that you're okay and that you're going to pick you up. But
Yeah,
yeah, I've definitely been in some more unfriendly things at some later concerts.
yeah, totally. So we'll wrap up in a little bit, but before we go, so Demons of Noon, what's coming up with you guys? What's happening in the future?
So since you listened to us, we've gained two more band members. So we're now a six-piece.
Yo,
We've got two women vocalists. So something that people might not know about Demons of Noon is that we all sing. So that's venues love us when I'm like, hey, we need 6 vocal mics as well. But that's yeah, having Sophie and Aria in the band has really filled the sound out in quite a special way. And we've got an album well underway. We've got the instrumental tracks laid down for all of that, and we're just chipping away recording vocals for them at the moment. So very excited to put an album out as soon as we can. And we've got a gig coming up Saturday the 18th of June at Whammy Backroom with a band called Ian Boss that are coming up from Wellington, featuring NATO, the drummer from Beast Wars,
sweet.
who's our biggest fan, I think, at the moment.
I think I've seen Beast Wars before. There was another band around, and maybe I got them mixed up. Battle Circus. Do you
Oh
remember
yeah,
them?
but yeah, I do. They
Mm,
we did a few gigs with them back in the International Flannel days.
yeah.
Yeah, but no, different bands. Beast Wars have this amazing singer called Matt, who's just got a voice like Diesel.
Crazy.
And is a lovely dude as well, to boot.
They're kind of like, correct me if I'm wrong, they're kind of like the New Zealand equivalent to Mastodon. Mastodon, is that right?
Yeah. Or bands like High on Fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huge riffs, tuned amazingly well. Like our band, we use Helix because we're cheap. I don't want to lug around crap. But there's nothing beats a real like stack of amps on stage that just like whacks you in the face. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Which Abraham, our guitarist, I'll never forgive him for this. Actually, he when we were flying to Wellington for the first gig, like I got an extra check bag for his pedal case, and then he ended up just going straight into the nice orange amp and not touching a pedal the whole night long.
Wow.
It's like, dude, come on. We flew this all the way to Wellington. You didn't use it. We flew it all the way back. Never again.
Yeah. Orange is weird. I've seen more and more bands, like hardcore heavy bands, use them, but I'd never really thought of them as that sort of amp. But they've kind of really put their foot down, and people have really made good use of them.
Yeah, and you know what? We use Marshall JCM 900s.
Wow.
Real standard.
Sure.
Which is a good thing to get used to, I think, because they're everywhere. So being able to get your sound good through the backline stuff is an important skill. Oh,
totally. My philosophy of recording music has always been, if it sounds cool, it sounds good. Like to me, do you know what I mean? I don't know what they call the amps on the Helix. I used to have a little PV amp that my music teacher bought through the school, and I paid the school back for it. And then my favorite pedal is obviously the middle zone too. That was my jam.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Buzzsaw.
We've all had a middle zone.
It's like a rite of passage, right? So
yeah. And Buzz Osborne from the Melvins exclusively uses Boss pedals.
Does he?
Yeah. And again, he's a thoughtful dude. He's like, they're everywhere. Man. If whatever country you're in, if your pedal breaks, you can go down to the local guitar shop and they'll probably have it. So yeah, it's very pragmatic.
So a couple of last questions is what do you reckon is one of the most, you've kind of mentioned a couple of albums, what do you think would be one of the most influential albums that kind of taught you how to listen to music? Because let's just, before you answer that, one of the things I struggle with at high school as a teacher is getting students to kind of find music that they don't like and then not learn how to like it, but come at it with fresh ears where they don't have a bias towards it. And then at the end of that experience, it could take years, they're like, I'm so glad you showed me that, sir, because it's literally changed my musical landscape. Like, one example, this is always example, is seems to be is one of the kids I showed hated Tool, which understandably I hated them as well. But, it took about 6 months to finally understand what they were listening to. And then from that experience, they were able to then bring that knowledge to other styles of music and other albums and be like, holy moly, I didn't know that this is how you listen to music. So I know that's a long-winded sort of intro to the question, but what do you reckon would be one album that kind of gave you that insight?
Well, I think firstly, all of the albums that I really love, I didn't love straight away. Basically, essentially all of them took me some time to get into. And I think that's one of the issues that we were touching on earlier with how if you don't like music these days, you turn it off within 5 seconds and stuff doesn't really get a chance. You don't really sort of get to study albums. And I mean, interestingly, and I talked about getting given a Caius album, which at the time I didn't appreciate because I was sort of like, gave a listen to it. I was like, went back to listening to Fred Durst or something probably. And then that grew on me. That was Blues for the Red Sun. By
what
Caius.
year was that?
94?
No, yeah, I was going to say, I'm pretty confident it's one of the very earlier albums that my mate's brother kind of introduced me to at the time.
Yeah. And then even, Josh Homme from Caius went on to form Queens of the Stone Age. And even that's one of my A+ favorite bands at the moment. In my Spotify Wrapped or whatever, it's like you just listen to Queens of the Stone Age, you should listen to something else. But again, because when I was younger, I was so wrapped up in difficulty and complexity and all of that. And then Caius, Queens of the Stone Age is the opposite of that, where they're just into warmth and they're into groove. And there's that first Queens of the Stone Age album, there's that song that just is the same riff for about 8 minutes. I was like, what is this? But so that's an entire band that it took me years to get into, and are now some of my musical heroes.
So do you reckon, like, what do you think about pop music? Do you enjoy it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's good.
Like,
Yeah,
I don't draw genre distinctions at all. There's music that I dig, and there's music that I don't dig.
100%. Yeah, this it wasn't until I got to you, I think maybe, like back in the day when you used to get a CD, you used to look at the credits, the liner notes. So I'd start looking at the producer, like Korn's album, Ross Robinson, who I feel is responsible for some of the greatest albums of day for bands that were coming through, like Slipknot's first album, for example.
Iowa as well.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I couldn't
believe he'd done Iowa as well. Man. But then eventually getting into, I used to hate pop, but then looking at songwriters like Max Martin and Lucas Goswald and Shellback, and there's just so many to talk about. But that's cool. I mean, that's one of those things that, again, like my students, they find it difficult to, if they're a Pantera fan, which Pantera is great, that they somehow then, because they're a metalhead, they shouldn't listen to pop or something because it's pop, which I think you said it correctly. It's like, I don't distinguish genres. It's just kind of, if it's good music, it's good music. Something along those lines. And lastly, what advice would you give to kids or students and people, or just people in general, of how to like listen to music with fresh ears to help them kind of maybe hear something or hear it differently for the first time? It's like when you watch a movie and there's this, like, behind the scenes of the dialogue and the cinematography and the acting, there's actually a subplot that exists, a metaphor, if you like. And sometimes it could take you years to understand that metaphor. It's not until one day you're like, holy crap, I didn't realize that. I feel like music has that effect where it's like you listen to it, but then one day you'll go, holy crap. Like for me, Radiohead's OK Computer or Kid A, for example, are a great example. So any skills or anything that you could suggest, of how people could listen to music and probably hear it with fresh ears and open their horizons a bit more?
Well, one of the tough things that you touched on with music is that it's wrapped up in people's identities. So they define themselves by, like, I listen to heavy metal. So the first thing is to just lay that aside, which is obviously quite a difficult thing to do. Probably another just really useful thing is just to articulate and talk about what you're listening to and what you're experiencing. And better still, talk about it with someone who loves it and ask them why they love it. And then that'll help you sort of understand that, I think, as well. And the final advice is go to the concert.
Yeah.
There's been so much stuff that the penny hasn't dropped for me until I've actually seen the band and figured it out and gone, that is what that is. And then gone back to the album and loved it.
There's one band I've never seen, and like, I hope I do. That's Radiohead. I love them to death.
Yeah.
I've seen Rammstein a couple of times. It's a band that you kind of have to see. Oh, so cool, man.
Yeah. Such a good show.
That's good advice. Okay, so what I'll do is, because it's New Zealand Music Month and this is coming out, this is May the 2nd, which is Monday coming. So your episode's coming out then. So hopefully we'll do a few more. But yeah, we'll list your details of your band and where they can listen to music and so forth. And I think when people go to listen to your music, they'll be like, oh, I didn't realize that Jonathan was that looked like this normal human being as opposed to some guy with like face paint like a mortal.
There you go. It's like the Wizard of Oz or something.
Yeah. So we'll leave it there. But thanks again, man. I'm just going to stop recording and then I'll keep you online until for a few more moments after that. So until next time, everybody. And also, sorry, before Joel from my music class kicks my butt, make sure you like and subscribe and hit that notification bell, fam. Okay.
Love it.
Take care.
Thanks for having me. See ya.